Great, it looks like the live stream is going. I got a notification.
Okay, cool.
Like
yep, it's fired up.
I guess we just start.
Me too.
All right, well, let's let everyone in, and John's done this before, so hopefully he'll be here and we'll be good to go.
Mhm.
Okay.
Carrie, I'll just be letting people in.
Thank you.
They all
Great, welcome everyone. We're connected, we're screen sharing, we're live streaming, we should be good to go. Great turnout today, great list of registrants. This meeting is being recorded, and this meeting is also being live streamed since we have over 100 people registered. This will allow anyone over 100 who tries to join the meeting to be able to view the meeting via YouTube, and also we'll be taking comments and questions during the discussion period, both in Zoom and on YouTube. So welcome to the January Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance meeting. We're so excited to have everyone here today. This is a great opportunity to utilize our regular bi-monthly meeting time to provide a project overview for the Southeast Plants Regional Species of Greatest Conservation Need project. I'm Carrie Radcliffe. I am the Southeast PCA co-chair and coordinator, and I work with Atlanta Botanical Gardens Conservation and Research Department. We also have some other speakers here today. So our agenda today, I'm going to provide a few minutes of welcome and updates with a little bit of background information. We're also going to have multiple project partners, many of which are Southeast PCA advisory committee members, giving presentations ranging from 5 to 30 minutes. We'll introduce each of those speakers as they're about to start. We're going to end the call with 25 or so minutes of discussion time where we can answer questions and have a group discussion about this project and what that is going to be like once you are able to view and hear from us the overview. Many of you are new to joining our call, so I just wanted to back up a little bit to give a background about who we are. So the Southeast PCA is a diverse partnership of professionals aiming to bridge gaps between local and national efforts, and collaborating and working together in order to prevent and restore the loss of diversity and ecosystem function in our region. So there's 4 primary high-level approaches we take to doing so, which is pursuing novel partnerships, leveraging our shared and collective resources, scaling up successful programs and models, and working as a group and an alliance to identify and implement creative solutions to our shared challenges. If you haven't already seen or accessed our plant conservation info sheet, you can find this at www.southeast-pca.org. This was developed utilizing preliminary strategic planning content at the end of 2020 in order to make information available both on our website and to the new administration about a year ago. We sent this to DC and have been sharing it with partners, but you can download this on our website and read more about our high-level goals, action items, and some other background information. There's also some links. There's live hyperlinks on the digital version that you can download. And if you'd like to access a formal printable version, you can contact us as well. just to give you a snapshot of what the Southeast PCA has been up to, in 2021, we were in various stages of 3 main projects, which included our ex situ plant collections gap analysis, which was pursued in conjunction with NatureServe and Botanic Gardens Conservation International. We have also been working with the Fish and Wildlife Southeastern region to improve recovery outcomes for the Endangered Species Act and some listed plant species that have been prioritized for that. You can read about both of these projects on our website and also access recordings from previous meetings. And we're happy to involve, going forward, working in partnership for those species involved in those projects. And then what we're talking about today, we actually applied for funding in the multi-state conservation grant program last year for the development of a regional species of greatest conservation need for our Southeast plants, and have been in the planning stages for the past several months. This project is officially launching as of December, January. So thank you for being part of that today. Most of you know all of these things, but our region is a biodiversity hotspot. We're threatened by a variety of influences. Of the 65 plants that have vanished in North America since European settlement, a high percentage of those have been from our Southeast region. So taking these and other things into consideration, developing an RSGCN list for plants will inform conservation strategies, status assessments, ranking updates, and allow us to more efficiently prioritize and apply conservation actions to these species. So this list will also help us communicate shared priorities between agencies and other partners, of which there are many great partners, including all of you in the Southeast. We also want to make sure that this is developed and available for states to reference in State Wildlife Action Plan revision and implementation, as well as conservation and research project proposals. So this has been a goal of the Seattle Wildlife Diversity Committee and is going to complement the existing animal list that was developed for that region a few years ago. This is just a very quick overview of what is going to be involved in this. So in terms of deliverables, we will be working with agencies and experts and other partners throughout the region to create the list, which will then be utilized to prioritize and update ranking and status assessments with NatureServe, who is going to be working to review and update rankings for 50 species in the fall after the development of the list, and then distributing this list so that everybody has that available to reference for not only state wildlife action plans, but other proposals and planning efforts across the region. So the main objectives are creating the list, conducting those conservation status assessments, and then these are the outcomes we hope to see, but we're not limited to that here. So, we pride ourselves on being leaders in the nation, and by us, I mean everyone on this call and all of the other rock stars and experts across the region who have been doing conservation in their states or in multiple states for years, some for decades. We look up to all of these amazing people and want to just come in to help facilitate and gather resources to help see this project happen, because it's certainly going to take everyone to do so. But once this does happen, it's available for the swaps. It's available if RAWA is passed for developing and having projects ready for funding for Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And also just in general, promoting enhanced data consistency, continuing to build and promote capacity and awareness for plant conservation in our region and beyond, and helping us be the leaders in the nation for plants. This is going to be the first RSGCN for plants in the nation, which is very exciting. And then other regions hopefully will follow suit and improve and expand on the process. And it's going to be good overall. So in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a map of the Southeast. So this is the SIAFWA, Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies region footprint. At this time, because of data availability, we're not going to be including the Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, It will be just the continental southeastern US states, but we do hope when it's time to revise this list in a few years down the road that we will then be able to include those areas. So at this time, I do want to turn it over to John Ambrose. So in addition to being an advisory committee member for the Southeast PCA, John is the Wildlife Conservation Chief for Georgia DNR and also part of the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Wildlife Diversity Committee. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and make sure we have John and that he can share his screen.
Okay, Carrie, I don't have any slides to share. I was just going to kind of build on what you said. I think you covered the ground very well in terms of the value of a regional species of greatest conservation need. Just a little bit more background. Back in 2018 and 2019, the states within the CIAFWA region, again, that's 15 states, and we also have 2 territories, kind of embarked on this project to develop an animal RSGCN list. And so starting with several thousand species that were listed in individual states' wildlife action plans, we went through a process of vetting and prioritizing those species and ended up with less than 1,000 that were considered of highest priority from a regional perspective. So we looked at which species are found across 2 or more states that are also considered to be imperiled. And we feel that this is a good list, that we couldn't include all of the animal taxonomic groups, but we focused on those groups that we had adequate data across several states to really focus on. But this is a list that we think is going to be helpful to individual states, as we move forward. And the same thing is true for plants. As Carrie said, helping us to focus on those species that occur across several states that are that the data tell us are in need of conservation. And so states and all the partners, across those states and within the region can develop plans for conservation, in situ and ex situ. It also helps us working with other partners, for example, working with Fish and Wildlife Service on those species that are listed, that are petitioned for listing, and those species that are candidate species. Again, it helps us bring resources together and work together as a group more cohesively and hopefully more effectively.
Thank you, John. Also, if you weren't part of previous meetings over the past year and a half, John has given some great presentations with slides, not that he needed them today at all, that you can go back and access, in particular, the July 2020 inaugural meeting recording, as well as the SEPCON 2020 conference recordings for some other relevant presentation links if you want more background information. Thank you, John. Next, we have Tracy Rice with Terwilliger Consulting Incorporated. And Karen Terwilliger and Tracy Rice are experts in terms of administering the process of developing RSGCN lists. And we're really excited to have them here today. And Tracy is going to be giving an overview of the process, which has been administered in multiple regions at this point for animals. Thank you,
Thanks.
Tracy, for being here.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks, John. That was a great setup. So let me go back into explaining what some of these acronyms that we've been talking about mean and what RSGCN really are and how we go about identifying them if you're not familiar with that process. Since we do have quite a large audience, I expect that many of you are not familiar with all of these words that we're bandying about and what we're really talking about with this project. So regional species of greatest conservation need are really a collaboration, as John and Carrie have just said, between not only the states, but the regional associations of fish and wildlife agencies. So in this case, the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which we comfortably call CFWA. And Carrie showed you the map of what that region entails. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as John mentioned, our team, and then all of the partners that most of you represent, as well as others that may not be on this call. So we have been fortunate now to have developed RSGCN in 3 different regions. The Northeast was the first. They started back in 2013, and they decided to update their list every 5 years. So they have now just embarked within the last month or two on their second update of their RSGCN list. Again, focusing on animals, and each go around adding more invertebrate taxonomic groups. As John said at the beginning, we focus on the groups where we have the most data and the most state expertise across the region so that we can bring together the right group of experts to assess things on a regional level. So what groups fall underneath that category changes on a yearly basis. And we're very excited now that we're going to be able to add plants with the Southeast as the lead. And I will tell you that the Northeast just a couple of weeks ago decided that they are going to follow your lead and do a plants list next year, because this year they're focusing on updating their entire list of the animals and adding a number of new invertebrate taxa. So next year is when they're hoping to follow your lead and use the lessons learned here in the Southeast to develop a plant list for all the reasons that Carrie already mentioned. So following the Northeast RSGCN animals list, as John said, the Southeast compiled an RSGCN animals list in 2018 and 2019. And then in this past year, the Midwest just finished a list. And us at Terwilliger Consulting, we've been fortunate to be able to assist all 3 regions throughout this process and really refine the selection criteria and the process involved. And that's what I'm going to explain to you today. It is now down to about a 1-year process. It depends on how many species there are, how many different taxonomic groups are being assessed. But it's gone from about an 18-month process when we initially did it in the Southeast and the Northeast. We're now down to about a year because we've got consistency across all 3 regions now. So what are RSGCN and what are SGCN? SGCN are species of greatest conservation need. As John mentioned, they are identified as species of concern within state wildlife action plans, or SWAPs. These plans and species lists are updated every 10 years. Now, many taxa are included in state SGCN lists, but the list of taxonomic groups included varies by state. The most recent round of SWAPs and SGCN lists date from 2015, meaning they're going to be updated in a very short order here in 2025. And now that they have been updated a couple times, the states can use trends and threats to the different species because they can track things over time as the SWAPs are updated. So SWAPs and SGCN are a major step forward for identifying and conserving at-risk species across the region, as well as within individual states. But we know that species don't follow state boundaries, and many species occur in multiple states. This leads to the question of identifying which species would identify most from a regional conservation approach. So RSGCN are regional species of greatest conservation need, or the regional equivalent to a state SGCN. And the states within a region review their compiled list of SGCN to identify which species rise to the level of regional concern. So if you just look at how many SGCN have been identified by each state, you can see it varies pretty widely. But as Carrie mentioned, the Southeast is a biodiversity hotspot for not only plants, but also for a number of wildlife. So you can see that the average is the highest in the Southeast. And as John mentioned, there's actually about 6,700 SGCN, unique SGCN within the Southeast, the highest in the country. So how do we go about selecting RSGCN? What are the selection criteria? First, the region needs to decide what the eligible pool of species are for consideration. Now, originally, this was limited to just SGCN, which is what the Northeast initially did in 2013 and in their first update in 2016, 2017. And then the Southeast, when they decided to do an RSGCN animal list, decided to allow some non-SGCN species that were of high concern to be considered, but they kept them on a separate list, and that's called a watch list. The Midwest then followed suit, allowing their taxa teams to identify non-SGCN more broadly for consideration. And those are then called proposed RSGCN instead of a watch list like the Southeast did. Now the Northeast is revising their list again, and their initial eligible species has broadened to any species that occurs in the region so that we are comprehensively applying the selection criteria to every species. We're hoping that this will then be more proactive in capturing species that are of imminent concern and having concerning trends before it's too late so that we can proactively conserve these species. We've also been able to, now that we've done this in 3 regions, standardize the pre-screening process and allows us to actually write some code to screen potential species in an automated fashion, which is what is allowing us currently in the Northeast to screen 18,000 species that occur in the Neafwa Northeast region, applying the exact same selection criteria. So what are these selection criteria? Primarily, there are the regional responsibility and conservation status. Now, the regional responsibility calculates the portion of the species geographic range that occurs within the region. RSGCN should have at least 50% regional responsibility in the region, but exceptions can be made for migratory species with large ranges, or for other overriding factors like disjunct populations, or if a species is highly imperiled throughout its range, no matter which region it occurs in. The conservation concern or status is the other primary selection criteria. And this factor includes a species G rank, its average S rank within the region, its listing status, and its IUCN Red List status. Again, there are a handful of overriding factors that can be made to allow exceptions for things like emerging threats, climate vulnerability, or if the species is a stronghold within the region. So we've incorporated some of these improvements each time around with each region. And first and foremost, we've developed that pre-screening process that I've mentioned to you. This allows us to, after we pre-screen species into one of 4 bins, either it's likely to be RSGCN, that generally means it met both of our selection criteria. It has high regional responsibility and high conservation concern. Maybe RSGCN meets one of those 2 selection criteria, but not the other. Not likely RSGCN, it didn't meet either of the selection criteria. And then unknown, meaning we're missing some information. Maybe it's a newly described species. Maybe it doesn't have full distribution information. It hasn't been evaluated for G ranks or on the IUCN Red List or whatever. So we were able to pre-screen all of the species and put it in one of those 4 bins. And as we did this in the Midwest most recently, we were about 80% accurate in identifying which species were likely to be RSGCN ultimately and which weren't. After we pre-screen this data, we have these 4 lists that we then send out to taxonomic review teams. And those are pulled together with representatives from each state for each taxonomic group. Where there is not full expertise across the region, we pull in experts from partner groups or from academia. So a taxonomic team might not be completely made up of state wildlife biologists, but include partners and academic experts as well. We'll go wherever the experts are. And sometimes they might actually be outside the region if they do their research within the region. So that by the time we give these lists to the taxonomic teams for their expert review, we have tried to do as much heavy lifting as possible to make their job as easy as possible. So by putting them on these 4 lists, they can then concentrate their review time, which we know is precious, on those species where we think they're most likely to be RSGCN, and especially those may be RSGCN. Then those teams give us back their expertise or their votes, if you will, and we refine the list, revise it into which ones the teams have consensus on that they think are RSGCN, which ones are consensus, no, these are not RSGCN. And then for those that we don't have consensus on, those still maybe ones in the middle, we pull them together in a webinar where we have the taxa team meet and we go through those maybe species one by one. And those are really valuable times where the experts can talk and share information across the region. And we frequently get folks from one side of the region saying, hey, we're seeing, this problem over here. What are you seeing over there? And the other states are like, no, we don't have any problems with that one yet. And so this great information sharing puts the whole region on notice to keep an eye out for a species that might not have been on their radar before. And a lot of information gets shared across state lines that wouldn't otherwise happen, which greatly enhances regional collaboration. And each time around, as I mentioned, we're able to include more and more invertebrate taxa and now finally plants, because every time we have a taxonomic team get together and do this in all three regions, the number one question we always get is, what about plants? What about plants? What about plants? So we're extremely excited to finally be doing plants. All right, so I've talked about RSGCN and about how some of the different regions have created different labels. First of all, if you're RSGCN, that means you are SGCN in at least one state within that region. And every RSGCN gets assigned by the tax team very high concern, or moderate concern. And that's just a relative ranking of priority within the RSGCN category. Now, the Southeast originally put non-SGCN species on a watch list, but the Midwest changed that name to be the proposed RSGCN, and the Northeast has now adopted the Midwest naming system. So when a species on the proposed RSGCN list becomes SGCN in at least one state, because states can update their SGCN list at any time, but especially as they're looking forward to these 2025 revisions. As soon as a proposed RSGCN becomes SGCN in at least one state, it will then become full RSGCN. And again, sometimes that's just a mere technicality. We know that taxonomy, for example, can change. Maybe a genus name has changed, or a subspecies has been elevated to full species status. These species might be listed as SGCN under their old taxonomy, but not under their current new accepted taxonomy. Therefore, it's just a technicality that it's not SGCN until the states update their list. We don't want to lose those species if they still qualify as RSGCN. That's why it's really important to then have this other category, kind of like a holding pattern, if you will, for species until they become SGCN. Then the watch list that the Southeast created has now evolved into a different type of thing in the Midwest and the Northeast. And the watch list has three different subcategories. The first is assessment priority. Remember, I mentioned that during our webinars, sometimes some states will have seen disturbing trends or emerging threats. Maybe it's a range contraction, and other states haven't yet. So there might be differences across the region and not a clear trend. So we have an assessment priority category. This is also where species that might be data deficient are. So these are species that the taxa teams think are of emerging concern, and they want to prioritize for additional effort in surveying and monitoring. So those are a watch list assessment category, assessment priority. Then we have a watch list interdependent species. As you well know, as botanists, there are a lot of host plants that interact with a lot of wildlife. We also have mussels that require fish hosts in their larval stage. We also have parasitic bees. There's a number of different species that rely on other species for their reproductive success and their survival. But those interdependent species might not qualify as RSGCN on their own, but are inherently linked to an RSGCN species success and conservation. Therefore, there's a watch list interdependent species category now. And when we designed that, we had plant hosts in mind to be a part of that, as well as things like fish hosts and parasitic bees. Then the last type of watch list is the deferral to an adjacent region. And this is something that we're only able to do now because we have three different regions that have RSGCN. When the Northeast was the first one to do RSGCN out there, the Southeast and the Midwest did not have lists yet. But they had species, maybe they were on the edge of the range where they had really high concern about the impairment. And so they took those as RSGCN, even though they didn't have really high regional responsibility. Now that we have three adjacent regions with lists, those edge of range species can be better addressed by making them a watch list deferral species. So the Midwest identified a number of species that they have very low regional responsibility for, but they have really high concern about. Maybe there's a range contraction and they're on the edge. So they don't have primary regional responsibility. They want to let their neighbors to the northeast or the southeast know, hey, we're seeing some really concerning trends here. We want to bring this species to your attention. Maybe you should consider it as RSGCN. Or if it's already RSGCN in your region, maybe you ought to take a look at that concern level and see if it needs to be bumped up based off of the disturbing trends we're seeing here in our region. So we now have 3 different types of the watch list. And then there's a proposed watch list, which, as you might imagine, are for the non-SGCN species. So we now have a number of categories that we didn't have before that more accurately capture the different levels and types of concerns that our taxa teams have for different types of species, because not all species are the same. And we think that this will work really well for plants as well as animals, because this system has to apply across all taxa. So it's already applying birds and fish and crayfish and bees and Lepidoptera and all these different types of taxa, that it lends itself really well to plants as well. So as I mentioned, it takes about a year to go through the whole process. And as Carrie mentioned, we are wrapping up and going through the planning process and are now reaching out to you to engage you as part of the process. So this is just an example of the workflow about how the taxa teams are involved, which is where I think a lot of you listening today might be recruited to participate. Generally, it takes about 10 to 15 hours to do a full taxonomic review. It includes reviewing those species lists that I mentioned to you before, getting together for a webinar or a workshop to discuss those species where there's not consensus. And then you also get to review the draft final list a couple times. And then, as Carrie mentioned, there's extra steps in this project to then select 50 of those species to go on for more detailed conservation status assessments and rank reviews. That would be an extra part to this. So as John mentioned, we do have a Southeast list. And let me just run through for you to familiarize yourself with what animals are on the RSGCN list in the Southeast and how that process works. So the Wildlife Diversity Committee of CIAFWA identified 3 different goals of their RSGCN list, which John began to mention, so I'm not going to go into details about this, but basically it's enhancing collaboration and efficiency across the states of the Southeast and highlighting the biodiversity that the region has. So I mentioned before that there's almost 6,700 SGCN when you compile the 15 swaps across the region. You can see plants are actually the largest proportion of those SGCN. And so we're really excited to finally be able to add those. And insects are the second largest group. And those different invertebrate groups are a little bit harder to compile expertise and information on, which is why they're not always at the forefront as well. And the Northeast is now paving the way for things like terrestrial snails and fireflies and some of these different insect groups. We all know they're really important, but it takes a little bit more effort to compile that information. So in the end, as John mentioned, we refined it down. We reviewed about 2,100 or about a third of those 6,700 SGCN amongst 8 different taxonomic animal groups, the 5 vertebrate groups, and then of the invertebrates, we've done crayfish, freshwater mussels, and bumblebees so far, about 960 species. And then 36 species that were not SGCN were placed on the Southeast watch list. So as soon as they become SGCN, they can become RSGCN. So if we look at it by taxonomic group, you can see how the 960 are made up. And the second column here in the middle is the proportion of SGCN in the region that ultimately were identified as RSGCN. You can see fish is the largest group here with about a third, and that goes back to that aquatic biodiversity that the Southeast has. The Southeast is not only a global biodiversity hotspot for plants, but it is for crayfish and aquatic species as well, which is why you can see here on the far right, this is the proportion of species of the RSGCN that are endemic to just the Southeast region. You can see 96% of the RSGCN crayfish only occur in the Southeast. And again, the amphibians and the fish and the mussels are also really high. So the Southeast RSGCN list is representative of that global biodiversity. So John mentioned that we divided the the RSGCN list up to those into two different groups, basically. Those that occurred in at least 3 states, those are considered shared species. And the ones that only occurred in 1 or 2 states are considered narrow range species. And a lot of times those narrow range species are endemic. Maybe it's something that's endemic to only one particular watershed. And so plants might also end up having a lot of endemic species because, of course, they have much narrower distribution, generally speaking, than something like a bird or a bat that can migrate across the entire country and beyond. Now, remember I mentioned that RSGCN have 3 different types of concern levels. 31% of those 960 RSGCN were identified by the taxa teams as very high concern, 44% as high, and about a quarter as moderate. And this is one of the ways that different partners could perhaps prioritize their conservation efforts, their research efforts, their funding efforts. They can go through and sort the list and find out which ones are very high and that those might be their highest priority for conservation and funding. Now, one of the other things that came out of the RSGCN animals list in the Southeast was a Wildlife Diversity Tech Committee made it a couple of recommendations. One is that the RSGCN list be updated every 10 years, but that minor revisions can be made in the meanwhile. Every region has a different number here. The Northeast, as I mentioned, is doing it every 5 years. Southeast is every 10, which is in sync with when the SWAPs are updated. SWAPs are updated every 10 years. So that list of SGCN species is going to change every 10 years. The Midwest, they're hoping to do it in something in between 5 and 10. So they're not entirely sure what their resources are going to allow at this point. Then the RSGCN list and all of its associated data should be posted online for reference and access. And John's group at Georgia DNR has already done that. And I'll give you the link at the end of this talk for that. And then the Wildlife Diversity Committee wants to make sure that they talk about RSGCN every year, which is one of the reasons why we're here today to do plants. Now, in addition to the RSGCN data, we actually compile an incredible amount of data as part of this research effort. Remember, I talked about all those selection criteria. So we have all of that data on the species ranks and conservation statuses, its geographic distribution, and its regional responsibility. And as part of that, we have the taxa teams review state level information and confirm it. So we want to confirm the SGCN status in your state. We want to confirm its S rank and make sure it's the most updated and current one. We want to confirm its state listing status within the states. And we also want to get occurrence information, whether it's listed or not, so that this gives us a really robust data set on the distribution of each of these species throughout the region. Now, the Midwest and the Northeast have also started to compile information about habitat associations for each RSGCN and for limiting factors and threats associated with each RSGCN. So let me just really briefly show you what that looks like. Each state SWAP, as you might imagine, uses its own habitat classification system. And it could be something standardized, it could be something custom. But when you try to roll things up to a regional level, that makes it a little bit more difficult because the different states are using different systems. So we generally have to come up with a coarse habitat classification system that rolls up all of those finer level details that the states have. So in the Midwest, there's 20. And these are what the 20 were that were identified most recently by the Midwest. A lot of these are natural, but some of them are anthropogenic habitat types because we know some species occur and use anthropogenic habitats. In the Midwest, their data set allowed for the selection or identification of up to 3 natural and 3 anthropogenic habitat types for each RSGCN. Now, what this allows users and partners to do is to then compile a list of all the RSGCN that are associated with a particular habitat type that perhaps they're doing conservation work or management on. It also allows for lists to be compiled for landscape level conservation. Say you want to do something in grassland habitat or a particular type of forest habitat across the region at a landscape level, you can then come up with a list of what all the RSGCN associated with that habitat are and let you work on groups or suites or assemblages at a time. But it can also identify biodiversity hotspots for RSGCN within particular habitats. And in the Southeast, everything is pointing at aquatic as being extremely important. So I would expect that the southeast habitats would point with a flashing red arrow right at aquatic habitats. But in addition to habitat associations and how that enhances landscape level conservation, which, by the way, let me back up a second, connect to something else Carrie said at the beginning. Carrie mentioned RAWA, the Restoring America Wildlife Act. If that passes, that focuses and prioritizes landscape level conservation. And the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, the national guidance for the regional associations, has also issued guidance within the past year, really focusing on landscape level conservation. So all of these efforts feed right into that and prepare the region to go grab those funding sources, because they have these tools in their hands that they can then use to justify funding projects. The last piece of information that the Northeast and the Midwest have started to try and compile are threats and limiting factors for each of the RSGCN. A lot of these focus on those habitats that I just mentioned, focusing on whether the habitat availability is limiting, the habitat condition, habitat connectivity, maybe some of what the habitat management needs are, but also some population dynamics and other threats issues like pollution or predation or harvest or take or competition, disease or invasive species. And this is a continuing effort because, as you could imagine, with so many species, this is an incredible amount of information that's out there that needs to be identified and pulled together and distilled down to the most important pieces of information for these species at the regional or the population level, not just at the state level, but at the regional or population level, which then informs what the regional conservation priorities should be. And those conservation assessments that the plants are going to feed into later this year will probably tackle some of these very same issues. I mentioned that I would share with you the links for where you can find the Southeast data set. John and his group graciously host these. They are available in an Airtable, which, if you're not familiar with Airtable, it's basically an online open source spreadsheet so that you can sort and filter and look at the RSGCN list in any number of ways. You can sort by taxonomic group, by which ones are federally listed, by which ones are high priority, which ones occur in the state of Florida, however you want to sort it. Airtable lets you do that right online, or you can download the entire spreadsheet and play with it in whatever your favorite spreadsheet software is. There's also a nifty little version of the Airtable that has these little like fact sheet cards on each of the RSGCN as well, which makes an outreach tool to non-biologists really useful. And then the National Wildlife Federation has taken the Southeast list and created some summary outreach documents based on the individual taxonomic groups as well, which are really cool to look at. So I think I'm going to let Wes take it over from here and talk a little bit more about our plants effort and how we're going to build off of this work that's already been done on the animals.
Great. Hi, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Wes, let's try again because it's giving us that black screen.
All right, we'll do it again and do it again, and then it usually works. Let's see here.
And I think you all know Wes because he's a Southeast rock star going back before his new job at NatureServe. Wesley Knapp is the new chief botanist for North America for NatureServe. We're still seeing that funny screen again.
Oh, wonderful. Let's try this. Third time's the charm. Big money, big money, big money. Can you see anything now?
It's doing it again.
Oh, this is wonderful. And again?
Yes.
How about now?
It looks slightly different, but it's doing it again. I'm sorry, Wes.
We had this problem in a test also. Let me swap these screens out. Maybe that will be the. How's that?
I'm still seeing that same screen.
Let's try this again.
This has happened to me again, or this has happened to me before. So I would, completely exit out of your slideshow and then maybe
Yeah,
restart.
I am
the slideshow.
out.
Okay.
I can also hard boot the slideshow. Let's try this again. Anything.
It's the same.
All right, let's try to do this one more time. And then we're going to probably have to just do this the old-fashioned way and talk without infographics. And I can just go over some numbers with y'all if that's the case. Let me try one more time too.
And as a backup, I can pull up the slides. I think I have the slides from a couple months ago. Let me find those.
Yeah, I can. We can also do that. Let's try this one more time though.
Okay.
I'm heavily modified from a couple months ago, so we'll see. How's that?
I'm seeing PowerPoint. Yes, I see your title slide. Good job.
So you see the entire title slide, not my presenter mode? Awesome. All right, now I can get going. Nice to see everybody. I'm Wes Knapp. I'm with NatureServe. I hope most of you know me from one experience or the other. But this is, I think, a really exciting project, as Tracy gave a nice on-ramp to lead the way for plant conservation at a regional level. The goals are pretty straightforward. They sound simple, but they may not be. We want to develop this RSGCN plant list of vascular plants in the Southeast. And then the tricky part really is identifying a subset of high conservation priority. And I've said this at our meetings, and I'll say it repeatedly throughout this process. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So it's going to be hard to get this big, broad, diverse region to a level where we feel confident in what the priorities really are. Now, we are well situated. We have a lot of supporting data. If you don't know NatureServe, we are like the organization that rests above the natural heritage programs. And if it wasn't for those programs and those experts on the ground, we wouldn't have the data we have. So thank all of you in the room who are state botanists who provide the information backbone for this, and all of you who are regional experts who help provide information outside of the state level, the subnational level. And we also do conservation status assessments here at NatureServe, and that will be a component of this project, is to identify which taxa need updated G ranks. We do that pretty, if you've probably seen this slide before with our rank assessments. We have national, here, national, global, and then we call them state ranks in the States, but they're actually subnational scales. And we come up with G ranks and S ranks, which I hope we are all familiar with as well. This is essentially an extinction matrix ranging from G5 being the most secure to G1 being critically imperiled with extinction. So each one of those phrases cuts off, most of them cut off extinction, but when we say critically imperiled, we mean with extinction. So keep that in mind. Then we have these really pretty maps like this on our website, which are color-coded to each tier. So if you've never been to NatureServe's Explorer, please take some time and look around there and provide feedback if you have questions or concerns. So we've seen this map. This is the 15-state region that is the CAFWA region. This is a mega diverse botanical region. It's a really super exciting region to work with. And Alan already spoiled the surprise by putting the number of taxa or species in the chat. This region has around 11,126. And I think my number is larger than Alan's because I think at this point, he doesn't have all of Texas in his data set. We had to pull out all of Texas. And when you get into West Texas, it's really a different beast, which will make prioritization even more difficult. So how do you figure out what are the highest priority plants of a region this large with this much diversity? So how does an effort like this provide the greatest strength for protecting species? And I think that's pretty straightforward because we're so used to looking just within our states, we don't necessarily what's going on outside of our states, which is something I've spent most of my career actually trying to do. We have some rare species that are going to be endemic to the region, some that are going to barely come into the region. Like Tracy mentioned, the majority concept versus the endemic concept. And then we have some that are going to be incredibly disjunct to the region as well. Maybe those will be a priority. And some will be at risk at one state, but not others. Like I think about things in Florida, which are common, but if they're found anywhere else, they're really quite special. So this is a great time to also say that this is not how the list will be created. These are ideas on how to create the list. It's going to be up to everyone in the chat and all the users to help provide information and ideas, because this is not a dictation from above. This is a collaborative process. So we brought up these concepts already. So endemic plants in the Southeast region, we have about 2,700 endemics. If you look at just majority, which is 50 to 99%, that matches the Tracy's concept of majority. That's 1,900. And then you look at the other things, a minority or uncertain, because there are some plants we don't really know much about. So under 49% or equal to 49%, it's another 6,500 taxa. Again, a massive and enormous group. If you break it down with G ranks or other ranks that we use, G1 and G2 and GH is 858. G3s alone are 957. And then we have some attempts here with the more than G3, more than or equal to G4s with more than or equal to 3 states of S1. So getting at that idea of, though they may not be rare in the region, there are multiple states in the region that track them as rare. So we have 124 where 3 or more states have them as S1, and then another 2,800, which are S1 in 2 or fewer states. We do have some issues here with hybrids and things we may want to vet eventually. But this here, to me, is where we really need to spend most of our time in the things we already know a lot about, unless there is something really significant slipping through the cracks. And if we break this down by geographic coverage area in the Southeast, you'll see already we're looking at a lot of plants in that G1, G2 category, either endemic or majority in the region, and even G3s, because a lot of action happens in these G3s. So a simple way to prioritize this could be just look at, okay, one of the plants that are the most likely to go extinct, which is the G1, G2s, and those should be or could be a high priority. Then you have these orange entities, which could be medium priorities, and the yellows could be low. So that's something to think about in terms of breaking down. And Tracy mentioned there were 960 animals on the GCN Southeast list. So if we just pick these 2 categories, that puts us like 720 or so. So that gives you an idea of where we are ballpark-wise with little analysis of things you may want to include additional to this. Now, some examples of how this would manifest. So something like Lobelia boykinii, this is a G2. It's nearly endemic to the region. But again, this may be a priority because it's so globally rare. But this is an edge case because you'll see South Carolina has an S3. Maybe the G rank is a G3. Maybe we need to reevaluate this. And maybe it would move from one tier to another. Something like Asclepias medii, which is not a plant you think of in the Southeast, but is in the Seattle Southeast, the Missouri portion of the range. This would be a more towards the median, even though it's a G2 and a federally listed plant, because there are other states outside of the region that have it, and they may actually have the majority of it. We'd have to do some more critical analysis to know, if we counted beans, if all of the populations are mostly Missouri, or if it's actually more common in Illinois or Nebraska, et cetera, things I don't know enough about at this point to study. But this is like a medium group idea, something that isn't stronghold in the Southeast, but is found in the Southeast. And then something, this is a little bit of an interest for me to also talk about some uniqueness of the heritage data. So this would be a low priority. It's G4, Chelonia obliqua, a wetland plant, not just found in the Southeast. So there's a lot of states where it occurs. But this is one of those things about the nature reserve maps. I'll just take the time to shamelessly plug the heritage botanist. Please rank your entire flora, because I'd love to know, is this really rare in Kentucky? What's going on in Florida? I do know that this is in Virginia and rare, but they had it at variety level. They tracked it as S1. So you get the idea. It's very rare in the Southeast, but it may be more common in other regions. It's not endemic to the Southeast. This would probably be a low priority cut for a species. But going back again, I think this is a simple way to think about it. We should find ways to refine our results, because when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And thinking about just how many are green here. So those are things we don't have to worry about. So the cuts are really up here in this region of the matrix. But one thing I would like to suggest possibly is maybe extinct plants we should dump into this high priority portion, because if they're rediscovered, they're going to be global conservation priorities. And I'd hate to see them missed for funding if they aren't on a regional list for prioritization. Now, Carrie did mention in the intro that there was a gap analysis done in the Southeastern United States regionally. And I included that map for illustrative purposes, because I think it gets at the idea that the diversity is not going to be evenly distributed in the region. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the plants for this list compare to the ex situ gap analysis. And I think we can all expect Florida and Texas will have a lot, whereas maybe Oklahoma and Missouri may not have as much. But it's just worthwhile to see that the breakdown is very different state to state. But I do want to leave with some questions, because this to me is a very collaborative product and idea about how to build an RSGCN plant list. What should we do with those extinct plants? I think they should probably be a high priority. What about Endangered Species Act listed plants? We haven't just, should they be in the high priority list just because they're ESA listed? There's probably political reasons to do that. But if something's G3, would we automatically move it to the high priority category? It already has special funding in place and many partners watching after it. We should probably think about undescribed species, especially things that we are fairly confident are distinct and are going to be very rare. We may want to prioritize those for the list. We may want to do some rank assessments on those, even though they don't have a valid combination at the species level yet, because they are of conservation importance. Do we want to do something with major disjuncts? I'm thinking about plants that may only be found in one place within the region, or they might be multi-state removed from any other location. They could have important alleles for conservation, important genetics. But again, if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. And of course, yes, we're going to work with Alan a lot in his Flora, the Southeast 2020 cut, or whatever he's maintaining right now in Flora Manager. We'll probably have to integrate closely with, because I know everybody in the region leans so heavily on his knowledge and expertise. So before anybody asks, of course, we're going to be working with Alan closely on this, even though he doesn't know it yet. So yeah, I think I'm the last. Am I the last presenter, Carrie?
We're going to have a few minutes for more project overview and a little more detail before.
Then we'll hold questions. So thanks, Atlanta, and thank all of you for attending, because I think this is going to be a fantastic product. And I just honestly can't believe that we have nearly 100 great botanists in the region on this call.
Thank you, Wes. It's incredibly exciting. Thank you all again for being here today, and just everybody's input and support with everything with SEPCON and the Southeast PCA so far. I'm so grateful that we've been able to jump right into so many important projects. I'm going to share my screen again, and then we'll continue right along. We do have Emily Coffey is going to share a little bit, and then I just wanted to come right back to this project overview slide for her. And then Emily, if you wanted to go over any of this again, otherwise we can go into the working group. So I'll let you lead that and I'll advance slides.
Yeah, I think we could we've had fantastic overviews from both John, Tracy, and Wes on sort of what has been done and then what we're looking forward. And Wes gave a great overview on some of those questions and how we're going to be thinking about some of this. I think it would be good now and we can pull the slide back up whenever we're in the discussion part. If anybody has specific questions on any of the deliverables, those overarching objectives and those finalized outcomes, which we're hoping to, we will be getting done by next year this time. So let's look at the working groups to just give everybody, Tracy did a really good job at sort of talking about how with the animal groups, some of these working groups worked. Of course, we're a little bit different because we, unlike mammalogists and various other animal specialties, we as botanists will be able to be a bit more broad in our working groups. And so we wanted to go over what we were thinking and how this project is going to be laid out and when and where to be expected to get invitations for various different meetings. So first off, we have our big project partners that you have heard from today, NatureServe, Terwilliger Consulting, and ABG. And we will be helping to push this project forward and really getting all of those public meetings together. We'll be sending out our participant surveys, inviting you all to meetings, developing technical team and advisory meetings, and really trying to provide as much of this information as early as possible, which is why we're giving you dates to start with. So for the general all over SEPCA, the absolute open meetings that we will be having over the next year, which we want you all to mark on your calendars, will be this introductory meeting, which is really our kickoff meeting today, January 10th, 2022. 2, believe it or not. And then we are looking at a November meeting in which we'll be able to actually present that RSGCN list. And then we'll be having ranking workshops, and reports, and final presentations next year around this time. Then we're going to be looking at our project survey participants. And this group is where we're going to have our natural heritage botanists and experts that NatureServe is going to be helping us develop those lists and pulling in all of our natural heritage botanists, in which we'll be able to get everyone's feedback and participation. There will be a survey online meeting, which we're going to have on March 14th. So Natural Heritage Botanists, please be putting these dates on your calendar. And then we're going to be having that ranking workshops results that will be the sort of culmination of all of that work that will be coming from there. And then, of course, the RSGCN final presentation report, which will be March of 2023. Go to the next slide, Carrie. And then we are going to have a working group for our natural heritage programs and state agencies. And these will be, this working group will help inform that participant survey list. We're going to have our single state or agency reps for a technical team, and these will be appointed by the state and agencies. And we can also then recommend additional experts for RSGCN and ranking workshops. So we'll be reaching out quite a bit. And we're doing this all through the collective of those partner, the NatureServe, Terwilliger, and ABG will be reaching out to you all. The technical team, so this is where we're going to have our project partners, our state representatives, plus invited advisors. And these are really that's getting down to the nitty gritty. A lot of the surveys that we'll be sending out, the questions that will be related to that, in which Terwilliger has already been had great success throughout the region, as you've seen. So we'll be utilizing all of that has been developed for Animal List as a baseline for our plant questions that we'll be building off of those years of experience. And eventually, so please, for technical, those natural heritage botanists and state representatives, please be looking at these dates, and we'll be sending out invitations in this the first quarter to everyone very soon. And finally, our ranking partners, that ranking workshops, these will be our NatureServe experts, ABG, and other invited experts that will be hosting this ranking workshop, and that will be held in the fall of 2022. So if you want to go one more. The overall, you all have seen, anybody who's been on some of the previous calls, we've talked about the sort of timeline, and the big dates that we're looking at are these virtual workshops that will be part of this RSGCN list creation and the surveys that will be getting sent out following that March meeting. And then the ranking workshops, which will be happening in person in October. And those will, preparation for that will obviously begin earlier in the year at the end of summer, middle to end of summer, with the culmination of those in-person workshops. And then finally, we'll be disseminating these results at the end of next year, going into March of 2023 to provide full ability for us to truly analyze all the data and get all of it out to all of our partners and get it as easily accessible as the Animal List is currently. And something that's super exciting is we get to welcome Sarah Norris, who will be our conservation partnerships assistant, who is joining ABG. And she is going to be here full time assisting Carrie. I'm going to let Carrie do her bio, but she's going to be joining us and helping with this project. And you'll be seeing a lot of emails and outreach from her. And we are just beyond excited to welcome Sarah.
We're also very excited to have additional support for the Southeast PCA. And just before I share Sarah's bio, I just wanted to share the announcement that my official title has been updated as the Conservation Partnerships Manager at the Southeastern Center for Conservation at Atlanta Botanical Garden. And I am so thrilled and excited and grateful to keep working with all of our amazing partners in the Southeast, in Georgia, with the Bog Learning Network and the Piedmont Prairie Partnership and other forums. It's amazing. And I love working with you all through the Southeast. And going along with my updated title is additional support from our institution for the Southeast PCA. As Emily says, we have hired a full-time assistant to support this regional alliance. And our new conservation partnership assistant is Sarah Norris. So you can see her lovely picture on this slide, and I will introduce her and then let her say hello. But Sarah Norris was born and raised in Atlanta, actually, before living in the Bahamas and Florida. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Animal Science from Berry College and her Master's in Environmental Science from Florida Gulf Coast University, where she published research on mercury and black-tip sharks. Though she has a marine science background, Sarah is very passionate about supporting conservation and research for terrestrial ecosystems. We are thrilled again to have her joining Atlanta Botanical Gardens Conservation and Research team later this month, next week actually, as our new CPA, our Conservation Partnerships Assistant. So we're thrilled that she's coming to us, and she's going to be utilizing her massive experience with project coordination and facilitation. She's been working in academic and research programs and helping with marine conservation and research, and that she's bringing that here back to Atlanta. She returns home and to help support ABG through the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance and developing the regional species of greatest conservation need list, as well as supporting other Southeast PCA projects. So welcome, Sarah. And if you're still there.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so many people on this call. Sarah's here. You can see her picture, and I'll just share my screen again so you can see her, but you'll be hearing more from her and from me, but at least it won't be all coming in anymore. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming today.
And I think now we are actually able to move on to, we tried to make sure. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Can you have, you're unmuted? Welcome, Sarah. I think we are now ready to move on to questions to give everybody, we wanted to save enough time that anyone who had any questions that they wanted to bring forward to the group, to any of the project partners, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, ask a question, or put a question in the chat.
Sure, and if you're on the YouTube live stream, you can add your question as a comment, and we have someone monitoring that.
No questions. The presenters did an absolutely amazing job today at really explaining what the list is about. And I think the most important and exciting thing, as every one of the presenters mentioned, was the fact that this is going to be really collaborative, and we're really going to be looking forward to working with all of the state natural heritage programs, the botanists across the region, and the experts, taxonomic experts on these list. And I think that the outcome will be really fantastic for the region.
Sure, and so I do see a question in the chat. The question is, can we re-clarify the overall purpose of the RSGCN funding and conservation efforts?
Definitely. Carrie, do you want to bring up the objective slide?
Yes,
Actually, that's very succinctly.
How's
so
that?
That's perfect. The objectives are, I think, to probably address, make sure that, so the objectives are stated here, but really the outcomes are what I would say are the most important for the region. And this is really to help provide the states and the region with the ability to have a region-wide list, which can help with prioritization and assessments. This will be able to then lead to additional funding, especially if RAWA is passed. So in many instances where states do not have plants listed in their state wildlife action plans, by adding plants to that list, it will increase the ability and funding sources that come from both federal and potentially regional sources. So this will increase for not only at a state level, but at a regional level. And it will really also enhance that data consistency across the region and hopefully build both capacity and awareness at a broader state level, because we do have in the Southeast a number of states that don't have plants included in those state wildlife action plans. And as part of the SEPCA, part of our objectives are to help with that advocacy and outreach in bringing plants greater funding opportunities through either state or federal funding, and also greater awareness in the general public perception. And if Carrie, if you want to add anything, or Wes or Tracy or John, if you want to add anything.
Sure, and I was going to say, if John is
experiences.
still on, I love what he always reminds us of. And John, do you want to speak to any updates, including those I didn't cover from a few months ago, about plants being included in swaps this next go around, or how this will help?
Sure. I'll just mention that the current version of Recovering America's Wildlife Act includes the language that says that states that do include plants as species of greatest conservation need can actually get a bonus in terms of their allocation of funds. So there's a kind of a built-in incentive for states to consider plants and include them if they haven't in the past. And one of the things that I can see that will really be of value is obviously looking at the final list. States can look at those RSGCN species that occur within their state and use those to kind of highlight in their wildlife action plans. But just the process that we'll be going through, all the vetting, all the updating of state information and updating of rarity ranks is really going to be helpful to all states, whether they have a plant species of greatest conservation need list at this point or not. We'll be improving our data and improving the state of knowledge of these species within the region.
Thank you, John. And I'm sorry if you just said this, I'm reading questions and answering texts, but so are all states in the Southeast now planning to attempt inclusion of plants in swaps in 2025? Is that correct?
That's correct. All states, this is based on a survey that was sent out by the Seattle Wildlife Diversity Committee. All states are interested in including plants in their next plan revision, wildlife action plan revision.
Great. And for those states who are able to do this and may not have the resources to come up with their own list or do not have their own list just yet, they can utilize the RSGCN species that do occur in their state from that regional list, correct? Or just simply add it as an appendix to their swap. So there's multiple ways that this can facilitate inclusion of plants in the swaps. Great. And then let's see. We have a question, will this effort include identifying regional conservation actions, especially concerning adaptation measures to address climate change? Who wants to take a stab at that one? I know we've been discussing that in our planning meetings.
If Tracy's still on the call, I'd actually like to know the answer to how this is handled in other regions, because I know we're creating a list of greatest conservation need, but that is not the actionable component of the product. What is the next step actionable component? Is that the does that fall to the swap plans at the state level?
It's a little bit of both. It depends on the region. So I mentioned how the RSGCN lists are now being expanded to include habitat associations and threats and limiting factors, because when you think about a swap, there are multiple elements that are required. You have to talk about the species. You have to talk about their habitats. You need to talk about their threats. And then you need to identify conservation actions. And then there's some other things about research needs and monitoring and implementation. So they're all multiple elements. So as the RSGCN process for wildlife's been around for a handful of years now, the regions are moving in that direction on trying to move from just the species to the habitats to the threats and then getting to those conservation actions. So what we've been able to do with the databases in the Northeast and then the Southeast just this month is actually kicking off a similar effort, so stay tuned, to compile a database pulling together all of the state swap information so that you can then look up a species, an RSGCN, and pull out those conservation actions that have been identified by the states. And we are currently in the Northeast rolling those up to identify which of those state conservation actions rise to a regional level. And the Northeast then tries to prioritize funding of implementing those conservation actions at a regional level. They actually in the Northeast have a funding mechanism where they pull some of their dollars from their state wildlife action plans for regional activities. So they do have a pot of money that they use to fund research and conservation actions and that kind of thing. So that is ultimately the goal, to not just make a list for a list's sake, but to actually get to meaningful conservation on the ground. Whether or not we identify specific conservation actions as part of this project, I don't know if that falls underneath the conservation status assessments, Wes, and I'm not entirely familiar with what you envision including in that or not.
Yeah, threats and trends are used to develop G ranks and S ranks. So those are incorporated. I was just more thinking about the actionable component, which comes after the prioritization.
And I would just add that, you know, the whole point of the state wildlife action plans is conservation action. So things that are included on the SGCN list are supposed to be addressed within the plan. Now, some states kind of organize their plans based on habitat objectives, and others are more species focused. So there will be some variation from state to state in that. But, you know, I think that the question of how detailed the conservation recommendations will be, you know, that come from this project is really just going to depend on the time that we have, the other resources that are available. But certainly climate, you know, threats and climate, you know, climate related adaptation should be a major consideration in this process.
Hello.
Hey, Lisa, I was going to say, go ahead with your question. Thank you for raising your hand and for your patience.
Thank you. I understand it's a really large meeting and I didn't want to barge in. I'm Lisa Cruz. I'm with Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And I wanted to emphasize one reason why this is important. I'm coming from the perspective of a botanist who works in a state wildlife agency where we have had, I think, an advantage for botany in Georgia because we're seamlessly integrated with our wildlife agency. And our heritage program is within our wildlife agency. And at the agency level, in the regional level for the agencies, and I'm speaking in particular Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, they've had the advantage of seamless integration with their animal conservation groups in many cases, more so than botany, where plants have simply not been a topic of conversation at the agents, in the agency meetings. And by creating this formal process that fits in with the agency process for creating a list of greatest species of greatest conservation need, that's a very important way by which this conversation about plant conservation priorities will be recognized and at official level by wildlife agencies. It's a way to help improve collaboration among institutions performing botanical conservation region-wide and statewide. And I know not always do the botanical conservation groups are always in good communication with the wildlife agencies in different states. And so by having this official list recognized at the regional level in the agencies, it's a really important way to bring plants into the conservation spotlight at the agencies. And it will improve ability to get funding for plant conservation. It provides more mechanisms and opportunities. So I wanted to make that comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. So I'm seeing some questioning and answering take place in the chat. So since we're getting closer to our time, I'm going to skip over questions that are being answered in the chat. So make sure you're looking at that if you're not, and then we'll scroll down. So in terms of distributing RSGCN across habitat types, ecoregions, there's also a question about, or a comment about considering ecoregions rather than the region because the awkwardness, the political boundaries. We agree. I think this was touched upon in the climate anticipation of climate change effects, but tying these things to the habitats, as Tracy mentioned, will go a long way toward informing needs for broad habitat types and other, landscape and habitats and ecosystems. Did you have are there questions related to that have not been answered by the comments from the other presenters? If not, we'll scroll down. We had a question for Wes that was answered already about S ranks, automatically helping update national and global ranks. This is more specific about ecological associations, but will RSGCNs be tied to specific ranked ecological associations to further effectuate landscape scale conservation efforts? I think so. I don't know that all that data will be in there right away in terms of linking to specific occurrences of ranked communities and things like that. But as Tracy had mentioned, categorizing needs and threats will go a long way toward informing conservation action, whether that's at the, species population or ecological system scale, is what we have discussed before. I don't know if anyone else wants to elaborate on that. And Wes is already answering. You're beating me to scrolling down. So follow that conversation in the chat. Any other questions or comments? We have about 5 more minutes. Is everyone excited? Pretty cool. Southeast leading the way, collectively, all of us together. Okay. Valerie, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I was wondering if this was going to be is this mostly federal funding? Obviously, I see that all of the state agencies are represented. And so I was just wondering where the bulk of the funding is coming from for this.
Thank you for asking. I forgot to elaborate. So we applied for a multi-state conservation grant through that program. And then this was kind of shared with the Seattle Wildlife Diversity Committee, and then funding was allocated directly from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Just because broadly, you know, this is supporting species listed under the ESA, but lucky for us, it's not limited to that. So we're incredibly grateful that they have allocated the funding. And hopefully we can get additional funding. Like we said, you know, it would be great in the future, and when we update our list down the line, in the next 5 to 10 years, we can include Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. When we had applied for the grant, NatureServe had come up with a really cool component that we had to leave out because of available funding, but it was also going to include developing a conservation strategy for economic and medicinal and other cultural species. So we hope to eventually get to that as well, if we can get funding in chunks to work on various aspects of, you know, conserving species across the region that are in need. But this is a really great start. And this is something that's been discussed since the 2016 SEPCON event. So for us to get the funding within a year of formally launching the regional alliance is great. And so really looking forward to working on this with everyone.
Carrie, one clarification on that. We did submit a proposal to the Multi-State Conservation Grant Program. That proposal was not accepted, but that led to a conversation, and many thanks and great appreciation to Mallory Martin with the Fish and Wildlife Service, who was able to identify some funding. So we got kind of a special grant out of this process.
Thank you for clarifying. So we have a question, a comment. This is all great info. Will there be a link for downloading today's discussion? As soon as we end this, the video will be on YouTube. So the link that was sent out via MailChimp and via Zoom goes straight to our channel, the Atlanta Botanical Garden Conservation and Research channel. That should be there within a few minutes. I'm also going to download it and upload it to the Southeast PCA website with some other information, including the project timeline, the schedule, the links that Tracy shared for the Southeast Animal List. If there's something else you want to see put up there, let us know. But if you haven't visited our website, go ahead and do that, because there's some other information you may be interested up there now. And we always post recordings from our meetings. It just takes a day or so to get that downloaded and then uploaded for the website. But you should be able to get it on YouTube in just a few moments. Okay.
Yeah, we have, you have your minute back.
Thank you for your comment, Lydia. I'm going to save the chat also. I always post an audio recording slide, like something like this. We'll get all the slides from the presenters, post those, and also have the chat and then the full video. So there will be options for getting this info, including the chat, which has some good Q&A in there as well. And now you can have your minute back. I'm amazed we didn't go over, but I'm glad everyone participated in the discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, all.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.